I think what was hard about this grief too is it's such a cycle. Like when someone passes away, you have the initial shock, you have the funeral, all of that, and you get closure with this. You're in a constant monthly cycle of this where you have hope, you're really excited for 2 weeks, then you have to wait for 2 weeks, and then everything will come crashing down again.
Greetings and welcome to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I am very glad to have you along, and I'm very excited about today's topic, one that's kind of been in waiting for a while, and we're going to tackle the topic of infertility. I've got Caleb Beyer here. You know Caleb as our marriage and family specialist. Welcome, Caleb.
Glad to be along for this conversation.
And to help with this conversation, Tyler and Casey Zimmerman are here as well, and they are a couple in Bloomington Normal Church, my home church, and I'm glad to have them along here as well. Welcome to both of you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Now, I said this has been long in coming. Caleb, you know that we get questions for us to step into this space of infertility. I know I have asked our listenership to provide topics, and this topic comes up. And I'm sure some people have been thinking I've been kicking this can down the road long enough and maybe not interested in the topic, and that's not it at all. This, like some topics, is too important to get wrong. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that causes me pause to say, this just needs to be carefully done. And I think our listenership understands, without a lot of explanation, why it is sensitive. But I'll tell you one reason why it's sensitive. Caleb, I can't speak to infertility beyond just ethereal. What I can learn from people and the relationships I've engaged with people and what I can read through research. But I think the topic warrants more than that. It warrants more than a textbook address of infertility based on a clinical, right?
Yeah.
You see it in the counseling room too,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
This is coming, this impacts folks. And so I wanted a couple to be able to speak to it. And that's not easy necessarily. Who wants to speak to this, right?
Right.
I don't even know who to ask, right? And then a number of months ago in Bloomington, we had an evening where infertility was addressed. Both Casey and Tyler, as well as another couple, just did a fine job speaking to it. And I said, here's a couple that's willing to step in and be vulnerable in this space. So that's my big intro.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tyler and Casey, for doing that.
You're welcome.
And I would love to hear maybe a little bit of your heart right off the bat. Why are you raising your hand to this?
We both just really feel like God gives you a story to share it. And we went through a lot of hard, but to God be the glory through all of it. And that's why he gave us this story. We wouldn't necessarily always choose the hard, but a lot of good came out of it.
Yeah. And we had couples going through when we were in our infertility that would share their story or share their experiences, share their hardships with us. And we were able to connect. We were able to feel a part going through infertility. That was a big part for us, is feeling separated, maybe from our friends that were getting pregnant or having children or even our family. And finding out that there was other people that experienced that same loss and experienced that same grief brought a connection and brought a lot of help. And so we want to be able to provide just another story for people to be able to go off of that too.
Sounds to me like your healing process, or maybe your maintenance process going through this journey, was people.
Yes.
Is that a true statement?
Yes.
And so that has motivated you to be vocal, because this is a topic that can go silent. And it goes silent for very reasonable reasons. I don't want to guilt anybody out there who's been silent with this struggle and saying, listen, you need to blab it.
Yeah.
That's not the message here.
Right.
Caleb?
I appreciate you stepping into that space of making that connection through sharing your story, because I don't know if this has been your experience, but sometimes even when individuals do try to step out and share, it may not go well. The expression back is one that isn't, it's not intended. No one intends not to be helpful, but it can be a well-meaning expression that leads to perhaps
That's
more
not
shame
helpful.
or more internalizing, wow, maybe something's going on with us. And so I just appreciate you stepping into this for couples to be able to make that connection.
So I think our goals here today, really, our goals are two-pronged. One is to be a voice for this hurt and for this pain and this grief and this reality that quite a few endure at some level. I think the CDC reported 10% of women struggle with infertility. I've seen numbers higher than that.
Yep.
And so this is a known struggle among many, but it varies, doesn't it?
It does. And I would just clarify and say sometimes it's the male. It's not always the female that struggles with infertility. And so that's what we commonly go to is the female. But 10 to 12%. And think about that. In your congregation, out of 100 couples, 10 to 12 of them are struggling with infertility.
Right. And whether or not it is maybe a problem with the female or the male, it's a couple thing. But, they're both experiencing that loss, both experiencing that grief. Sometimes it's together. Sometimes maybe one person has a little bit more of the share. So,
so I'd love to be a voice. And then the second prong would be to encouragement to the couples that are enduring infertility or have endured infertility. Even if you have children, that doesn't mean you're exempt from the pain of infertility, right? So I think sometimes we like closure and okay, they had a child. Okay, everything's good. But that's not necessarily the truth, right? It's more complicated than that.
It is.
What is the nature of infertility that makes it so sensitive? And there's probably a dozen reasons, but Tyler, Casey, be a voice in that pain.
I guess what's hard about it is it's such a silent grief. It's an intimate thing with you and your spouse, and you're inviting people into that space. And it's hopes and dreams. It's a loss, but it's not the loss of something physical yet. It can turn to that, but it's not at the start of it.
And Caleb, I think the clinical term is disenfranchised grief, right?
Yeah. When do you start grieving? Like our typical grieving, when you have a funeral and you come together as a community, and like in infertility, when does that start and stop? And then the silent piece, like you said, is like we are bearing this, and we have this community that we go, we're with on Sunday, yet we feel separate from them as a result of this that we're carrying, right? And that makes it really hard.
Our church very much celebrates children, which is something that we love, and we're focused around children. But when you don't have that and you want it, it's very hard to walk in the doors on Sunday.
Yeah.
Speak even to when you don't have that and you want it.
You feel like it's a God-given desire to be parents, to be a mother, and it is built into you to carry a child. I feel like God builds that into the nature of a mother even before you ever are pregnant. And when that's not happening, it is easy to start questioning, well, why am I not good enough to have a child? Am I doing something? God doesn't punish you through life circumstances. He's shown that through infertility in the Bible, but it's also, why can't I have this?
It can feel like a punishment, maybe.
But Caleb mentioned there in some of your opening comments mentioned shame. Would you say shame is a good word?
Yeah, you can definitely feel a lot of shame that you were supposed to be able to, we have a body that can procreate, and shame that that's not working, shame that we can't be included in things, and
your body's not enough, or your relation or something is lacks somehow.
I think that's an important word to kind of highlight, because I think some people would be surprised that you endure shame because of infertility. Does that make sense? I don't think it's a natural connection. Well, shame means that you did something wrong, and you know what I mean saying? We run that script. If we haven't experienced it, it's a little bit more of a mental gymnastics to say, they are shameful. But I think it's important to elevate. Caleb, say a little bit more about shame.
One of the things that feeds it is just being alone, being hidden, right? It's an environment, a fertile environment for shame to grow. Unfortunately, in this situation, it's really difficult to shed light and truth into that.
I think that's an excellent point for us to understand that nature of shame, on where shame flourishes.
Yeah.
And it's going to flourish in a situation like this.
And even like one of you touched on, of going to church where we value family, we value connections, and to be reminded we don't have that.
Speak to that experience of community. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, you would talk, Case, a lot about your friends would announce a pregnancy or something like that, and you're like, man, I'm trying to figure out the best way to not have my mascara run or something like that. And, just figuring out a way to celebrate with your friends, because we're definitely joyful. I mean, we're excited and happy, but yet at that same time, it's reminded of that loss, what that desire that we don't have fulfilled. So managing that was difficult. It was a balance of trying to celebrate with our church family and trying to celebrate together and rejoice together, and yet still protecting ourselves from the reality that we had to face. I would say we definitely had people weeping with us too. We definitely had some close friends that were standing alongside us through this. But even through that, at times, we both noted that sometimes that drifted apart a little bit too. Because after several years of this, what else is there to say? And sometimes people lost a touch with it because there isn't anything to say. And so that was hard.
I think what was hard about this grief too is it's such a cycle. Like when someone passes away, you have the initial shock, you have the funeral, all of that, and you get closure with this. You're on a constant monthly cycle of this where you have hope, you're really excited for 2 weeks, then you have to wait for 2 weeks, and then everything will come crashing down again. And so you walk into church one Sunday super hopeful that you're pregnant, that whatever happened with medical procedures or whatever worked that past week, and then you walk in the following Sunday knowing it didn't, and watching your friend that just announced her pregnancy.
Caleb, when you hear that, when you hear of cyclic hope and then dashed hope cycle, that has to have some emotional toll.
Oh, for sure. At what point do you just give up that hope, right? I mean, at what point, because the very thing that I hope in is bringing me the pain. And so at some point, the longer this cycle goes on, the harder it is to grasp hold of that hope, is what my mind goes to. Hope is holding on to those negative emotions and pain. And I want to shut that negative stuff down, which also shuts my desire and hope down, right? Yeah. And so that's hard, painful, and exhausting.
Yeah. And I would say that adds to some of that shame as well. You talked about having that hope, and that hope was for us to have a child. And we knew that we had this desire. That was clear in evidence. Casey and I would talk together, and we dreamed about that since we'd been married, of having children and developing a family together. And so we felt that was something God-given. And so when it wasn't happening, we kept going back to, what are we doing wrong? Or, that hope was dashed, and we kept looking at ways to try to improve or change something different, or, even things like dieting different or something like that. We're grasping at straws eventually.
Sure.
But that just built up that shame more and more each time that hope was dashed.
Yeah. And even I imagine, I don't know, but this process is a fairly invasive process as far as what you need to do to, the process you go through once a month to make this happen.
And I'd like to go there. I'd like to give Casey and Tyler this opportunity to really kind of share your story. And maybe to do that, let's set that up and say yours is unique.
Every story is unique in their own way. And just because ours ended a certain way doesn't mean that any other story is going to end this way. In between the friends that we know of, all of our stories have ended differently. And that makes all of us unique and doesn't make it right or wrong in any way.
And I think what's important, Tyler, and I think sometimes when we listen to a testimony, I think sometimes it's important for us to know how to listen. And I might encourage our listeners to listen in this way.
That's
Number
a good
one,
idea. Yeah.
Number one, look for common pain. We can all connect with your story, whether we've endured infertility or not. There is going to be some things that are common. Pain is common in some ways. So listen for the common pain, because that builds a level of empathy, but also listen for unique pain to Tyler and Casey, unique pain to others that I have not. Does that make sense? Yeah. Kind of holding both of these in tandem, common pain and unique pain. And I think the outcome then will be a good one. I think we will hear and learn what we need to hear and learn.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Take us on this journey. Let's start with the end, because I think our listeners want to know what the end is.
Sure.
Yeah. So you've got two precious children.
We do. Yeah.
Give us their names, their ages, and how they came into your care.
We have JC, and she is 4.5, and she was born July of 2016. And she came to us through domestic adoption. And then we have Emmy, and she was born at the end of March of 17. So that is 8 months and 16 days apart. And she is our biological child.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a little bit with the end in sight. Let's hear a little bit of that story to bring us to that end. And we're not at the end of the story.
Yeah.
But anyway, bring us up to speed.
We were married in June of 2010, and we began trying to have a baby in 2013. We did the initial meet with our doctor, and she said, go try for 6 months, and if nothing happens, come back and we'll do some preliminary blood work. So we went back, and the blood work, nothing came back as a red flag. So then we came back then after a year, because insurance will not cover infertility until you've been trying for a year. And so we went back and we started taking a medication called Clomid. And after a couple of rounds of taking the med and nothing happening, they sent us for some more testing. Again, nothing came back as abnormal, and so they suggested more aggressive treatment at this point. And we ran into some other issues with this doctor's office, so we ended up switching doctors at this point. And each time we went to another doctor, they would suggest another more aggressive treatment. And all of these processes included several doctor's appointments at specific times of the day. We were there at 7 in the morning. We were there at 5 o'clock at night.
Yeah, they would open the office for us.
Yeah, we were there on
Just us and the doctor.
Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah.
And through all of this, we had different battles with the insurance company and if they would cover medications or not. And so there was one instance that I needed a specific injection within a 4-hour window. And as I was standing at the counter, they told me that insurance was going to deny it because I needed a pre-approval within their pre-approval. And so we had to pay $275 for one shot that day. And so that was just one of the many battles we had. Thankfully, we were able to switch insurance companies.
Well, let's just accent this part of the journey, Caleb, and that is, who's my doctor? Who's my insurance carrier, right?
Yeah.
All of these things are very intrusive, number one. But number two, very organizational, very administrative. And I would have to think, because of the nature of having children and a sunset on that, you're probably always wondering, should I be having a different doctor? And when do I make that move? Does that make sense?
Oh, for sure.
Is that
questioning?
And you quickly find out that, like everything, doctors have lots of different opinions on what should be done and what shouldn't. And what was hard for us is we had eventually what we were diagnosed with was unexplained infertility. So they never found a medical reason why. And so that made it even more difficult.
Because maybe another doctor would know.
Yeah.
Well, and going back, like you had said that we had been placed on Clomid with our first doctor. And when we went to the next doctor, she was like, oh, Clomid's such a old drug. I mean, I don't even prescribe that anymore. And so just a difference of opinion there. Yeah. Both are still widely used. But just
it
one,
still
one
posits,
opinion to
Tyler,
different.
posits an idea in your head that says that last doctor was crazy.
Yeah.
Or,
Or,
this
this is the
one is.
answer. This is going to work again. The hope rises. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
About something you value so highly and so much, right? You know, to be told, that's an old, you know.
That's the answer. That's the easy answer type
Yeah,
of thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
This insurance thing, too, how difficult it must have been to talk to a business as usual person on the other side of a phone call, right? On something so personal and important to you. You just kind of look at the different worlds, right? That infertility raises this institutional world of, you know, you need to talk to so-and-so in department such and such, and we need this formality when so much is at stake in your heart.
Yeah. You can't put a value to that, right?
Yeah.
And yet there's
You're
things
talking
that
about
are
nickels and dimes.
Yes.
True. Well, and my wife is very determined, and she ended up really working through the insurance companies. Ended up finding a specific name of a lady that she wasn't even supposed to have the name of, and got her direct number and was calling her. And the lady at one point was like, "How did you even get my number?" And so, I mean, at some point, you just feel desperate. You're just, I'm going to do whatever it takes just to get through this.
You learn how to do your research.
You do. You definitely do. Yeah.
So we did treatments for 2 years with only a few small breaks in between, including exploratory surgery to see if there was something that wasn't showing up on the normal tests.
Let me pause and say one thing with that is majority of this has been Casey so far. Majority of these treatments have been invasive towards Casey. I had 1 or 2 small doctor's appointments in there that, while they were uncomfortable for me, they weren't as nearly as intrusive. And so Casey was undergoing, while I was watching it and going with her, this was her body being affected, her getting the meds and the hormones and having the treatments done to her and having some of the pain going through, especially that surgery and stuff.
And let's just accent the exposure you must have felt. Everything on display.
Yeah.
Every question is fair game, which is tough.
And then they put you on hormones, which lead to all kinds of physical symptoms, along with emotional and spiritual, and just every part of you is under a microscope, and you have symptoms in every part of you.
The shared struggle you have, but also the different struggle. For you, being exposed early on in this process is extremely, a vulnerable place to be, and holding on that tension with the value. And then for you as a husband to see your wife going through that, and see her, like, at what point do you start thinking, wow, is this, I don't know, should we continue with this? And just having that wrestling match, but I think in different ways, maybe not, but that's what's going through my mind as you're talking about this.
Definitely. And as most husbands, we're a fix-it type of husband.
Yeah.
We want to be able to go fix that for our wives. And this was well out of my control.
and if fixing it means more exposure to my wife and
definitely.
pain. And
Because I'm supposed to protect my wife.
Yes.
So what does protecting my wife look like right through this? I don't know.
Yeah.
But then also the shame part of it as a wife comes in, of which for us, they never found a medical issue that it was one person's body over the other, why it didn't work. But that does come into play of if one spouse is specifically infertile and can't provide that for their spouse.
To feel that shame for the other one.
Yeah, thanks for elevating that, because that is part of some people's stories. We're looking for what's common and what's unique here, and some have that, and that would be a lot to bear.
I would say our story, and that is very unique, that they didn't find a cause. Many times they do find some type of reason, and some are able to be treated and many are not.
So this brings us to September 2015, and so we were up to an even more aggressive medication, which consisted of injections every day, 5 doctor's visits within 7 days, and my body not responding the way it should have. And also my husband is a firefighter in 24-hour shifts. So planning all that around his work schedule got very complicated.
I work 24 hours on, and then I'm off for 48 hours. And so cycles don't just go every third day.
I got injections and an ambulance bay and all kinds of stuff.
Coworkers, sometimes I'd get called out on a call, and one of my coworkers would go and give her a shot.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
So this was our last cycle of intensive treatment. Basically, we had done everything up to IVF at this point. And so our choices were to stop or pursue IVF. And for us, we felt like God closed the door to IVF. We don't know why. Up until this point, we were pushing, let's do whatever we can.
Were you on the same page with that?
Yeah, we both had full intentions that we weren't going to stop. We were planning to do IVF. In fact, we had doctor's appointments set up to pursue.
And then all that stopped.
All of our mindset changed. I wouldn't say that it stopped, because we actually kept the doctor's appointment. But our mindset changed, and it changed over to adoption. Just our heart changed.
We just really felt like God closed the door. That's how we've done stuff throughout our marriage is, okay, God, we're going to start walking, and when you tell us, you close the door and we'll stop. But until you do that, we're going to walk. And so we were doing that. We did keep one final appointment with a fertility specialist, and we had an appointment with him, and he said, you have less than a 10% chance of ever having a child biologically without IVF.
Wow.
But we walked out of that appointment, and we just felt God telling us, no, don't pursue this. You need to pursue adoption.
And adoption was something that had been in Casey and my heart since we had been married. We talked about it. We never believed that it would come before biological children. We'd always thought that, we'll have a couple kids, and then we'll, we got everything planned out just perfect.
Yeah.
And X amount of years that's going to happen, and we'll eventually get to adoption. And this was the first time that adoption really came forward to us, and it was like, no, this is something we should pursue right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the God story in it, is the week that we stopped treatments and found out we were done and signed up with the adoption agency. Our oldest daughter was conceived that week.
The one that you would adopt here in a few short months.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we began pursuing.
Talk about planning. Tyler.
Yeah.
Right?
He's a better planner than me, that's for sure.
So we kept going. We started doing our home study, got that all complete, and then we were starting to see potential situations for adoption. And one night after we had a few no's, we hit a dark spot.
A few no's
Of potential
door
situations.
shutting, saying
Yeah, so
no to adoption.
process, at least for an infant domestic, is you become matched with a birth mom. We would present our profile. You make a little profile book beforehand, and we'd present that, and we'd presented it to multiple potential birth moms, and it came back no each time.
I'm going to put my finger on something I think that's incredibly painful. It's one thing if God says no. We have, I think, a place in our brain that says, okay, God can do whatever he wants. But when people start saying no to us, when people start saying, no, you're not good enough, that shame piece screams, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it definitely was. It was a new feeling that I don't think we'd even experienced in infertility, but it definitely brought all the infertility emotions rushing up. So we talked a lot about hope here, before this. And I think going into it, the adoption and doing all that paperwork brought just this new hope to us of having a child and bringing a child into our family. And then suddenly this wasn't working either. And it was just incredibly frustrating. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt now my conversation with Casey, Tyler, and Caleb. Thanks, each one, for being on. You'll want to return with us to hear the remaining part of their story. There is hope for all of us in it. Have a great day.